So here at Purdue, as you can see from the slide, we had a whole lot of failed attempts to get monitoring working. And what we wanted to do was just bring everything into the center. So we looked at what we had, and we just noticed that we had a whole bunch of individual silos of information. And so we needed to get each of those different groups together so that we had one holistic view of our infrastructure, to make sure that we could actually relate the data from each of the different teams, and then put it all together. And then on the next slide, it goes into the different silos of information.
Just on this slide here, Shawn, I think sort of the two things that jumped out to us when we first saw this, first of all, was the first point that you'd really recognized that monitoring wasn't working for you guys. So I think a lot of organizations find themselves in this position, which is they have monitoring, they have SCOM installed, they're monitoring. So why isn't it working? Why are they still having application failures? And actually, the fact that you kind of looked at this and said, okay, guys, this isn't working. We've even tried to improve it in the past, and it still hasn't been successful. What are we missing here? I think that's probably the first, the first step is recognition of that. I think that really sort of stood out that you're really going to look at this differently. The second one, there's a sort of fourth point down, was around key metrics have been elusive to collect, which is a very sort of euphemistic phrase. I think probably what you're meaning is that people were reluctant to give that information out to other teams. That information was there. Of course, all data really is fundamentally collectible across an IT environment. But the fact that it was elusive for some teams to see some data maybe really means that sort of there was some unwillingness to share that data.
Absolutely. So in our particular case, each of our groups, they do a really good job at what they do. So the DBA team, they have their monitoring tool, and they're really good at monitoring from their perspective. And then you could move on to like the networking team, they have their tool and they monitor their piece. But what was happening when we talk about, to the first point about it not being relatable across boundaries, is when an application that spanned multiple tiers had a problem, nobody was able to actually say what was going on for that particular app within their infrastructure. So the customer would say, hey, we're having a problem. And then the app admin would say, okay, what's your problem? And then they would find out the problem, but they couldn't say, they go to the DBA team and said, tell me what's going on. And the DBA team would say, well, our tool reports no problems, everything's fine. And then they would go to the networking. Did you have any problems? And they would say no. And there were no metrics behind it. There was nothing relatable across the infrastructure. And so pulling into the key metrics being elusive to collect, the DBA team really didn't know how the apps worked. The application admin team didn't have any metrics for their apps. So this is where we used Operations Manager to put them all together. And then we used Squared Up to actually show that end-to-end view. So we're able to collect the data at the DBA layer, or collect the data at the application layer, collect the data at the OS layer, and then raise those metrics that are important for that application, and then show them all the way across for that perspective. So that gives us our end-to-end view.
We'll look at
all within one dashboard.
We'll look at a sort of typical application stack in a second. I think the next slide we have, again, a slide that you had put together internally at Purdue there was just to demonstrate the complex web of relationships between the different teams or the different silos.
Absolutely. This actually shows each of the different silos. So customers come in at the top layer. So they would either come in through one of three different areas, through our customer applications, enterprise applications, or application services. And then depending on the nature of the app, they could hit the DBA team, the web team, or both teams, then the Windows team, the Linux team, and then all the different services at the bottom. So they hit different virtualization stacks, different storage tiers, and of course the network permeates that whole diagram. And so again, each team was really good at monitoring at their level, but when it came to end-to-end looking at a particular application, there was no holistic view of that. And so we couldn't actually say with any certainty, our app is doing good because here's our key performance indicators. So we just didn't have it.
And you mentioned sort of end-to-end there, and I think that's something else you came to us saying, which was my directors asked for end-to-end dashboarding across our applications. We've got a monitoring tool showing me end-to-end monitoring, and I think one of the realizations or one of the questions, which is what is end-to-end and what does it mean for different users?
Yeah, actually, that was our CIO, and he when I first met with him to show him all of this, his question was, well, what do you mean end-to-end? Who's your target audience here? And he knows like the admins want to see something, but we also have people throughout the organization. So we have the service desk, and they need to know the status of the app just from a high level, red, green, yellow. And then we have the directors, and they only care about some key performance indicator. Tell me that your app is actually working. And then, of course, the managers and the admins, they can usually share, but the admins are going to want more detailed view, but the application admins are going to want the information related directly to their apps. So how can we leverage all of this easily and make it updatable and refreshable and show all of this information quickly? And you know, that's kind of what he challenged us to do.
And hopefully we'll see that in action when we get to the demo. I think the interesting one there is at the bottom, the service desk. I mean, obviously the admins is often well catered for, and then you have the manager, which is sort of slightly higher level. Director, sure, they want the SLA dashboard, but you know, how about the service desk guys that are at the rough end of application, you know, support, which is taking those tickets from end users, having to respond to them about knowing that the application is performing badly or down. Right. What information do they need? And again, they don't want to see database level metrics at that point, but they do need some understanding of the availability and performance of that application.
Right, and yeah, there's an error or there's some sort of health state showing out. What does that impact actually mean? You know, some databases failed. Okay, great. What does that mean people can or can't do? What's the functionality impact?
Exactly. Yep, because we have a very redundant infrastructure. So there are many servers that support a lot of this infrastructure, and one of those servers can go down and not impact the service, but we need to make that alert relevant.
And then so coming back to the stack, we'll come on in a second to the example app that you looked at, but this is, I guess, an example of an application stack, and it comes back to that question of, okay, we maybe understand a little bit better about what people want to see, but here's the challenge again, which is that information is in so many different places.
Yep. This particular stack, when I met with the CIO, he wanted to know what we meant. So the first end-to-end was across the infrastructure, then end-to-end was for the application. So what we did was we took a sample application, which we'll talk about in a second, but the application we chose was Blackboard, and you can see how the customer comes in, and then we have like outside in, and then cloud, then our F5s, then our application tier, the database tier, the Linux layer, and then of course the virtualization, storage, and networking. And then off to the right, you can see that we have, you know, what we had. So like the F5 has great monitoring out of the box, but it's for the F5 administrator. So getting information out of there to the Blackboard Learn admin or to the database admin to find out how the F5 was working was kind of difficult. At the app tier, you know, they have application specific things, but they couldn't share that broadly. It was just, you know, they had their own logs, they had their own data. What did it mean holistically for the app? So we had a lot of limited insight, but nothing that spanned the entire stack.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that stack should look very familiar to many people, and we'll see the F5 there, which we covered off in last week's webinar with Comtrade. You know, there's at least an option to bring that into SCOM, but that's still only sort of part of the story, is to have the sort of SCOM monitoring on it.
Yep, absolutely.
So you sort of mentioned this example app, and I think this is another interesting aspect of how Purdue, or you at Purdue, approach this problem, which is to sort of recognize the problem, really sort of understand it, talk about it, talk about some of the challenges, and then say, okay, how are we going to solve this, and come up with some ideas, but then actually to really kind of go through a full sort of proof of concept based on, you know, successfully monitoring one application and building the dashboards you need, and really proving that you can do it. And if you can do it for one app and one of your main apps, then you can start to roll that out across your other apps. And that's what we'll see in the demo shortly. So you mentioned it just then, the example application. So you identified Blackboard Learn as the application, one of 100 or so apps you have there at Purdue. Can you talk us through a little bit about what Blackboard does?
Well, I actually want to give you, on the slide here, it says hundreds of apps. I found out yesterday we actually have over 500 applications here in Central App. Yeah. So that was kind of a shocker to me. Blackboard Learn is one of our major apps for the student side of the university. So that actually supports the learning and research aspects of our university. So students, instructors and students are able to log in. Instructors can create homework. They can post grades. They can post reading assignments, and then students can actually use it to log in, post their answers or look at their grades or take exams. It's really it's the central portal for us for all of our e-learning efforts, trying to get everything into that paperless society kind of aspect. When it goes down, I think our enrollment is around 42,000 people. When it's down, there's 42,000 people that can't do something.
And speaking of that, another nice sort of connection with this case study was you told us about Blackboard Learn being the application you focused on. I then just sent a Slack message to one of our UI developers here at Squared Up, just recently graduated from the University of Reading, and named Dave. And I said, hey, Dave, have you heard of this Blackboard app? Can you tell me anything about it? I'd never come across it before. So Dave responded saying, yeah, it's the main e-learning system at the University of Reading. Use it every day. Just sort of, covering what you just said there, Shawn, lecture notes, coursework, submissions, really kind of critical stuff. I hadn't given him the context of asking this question. I just literally asked him what Blackboard Learn was. So totally unprompted, 2 minutes later, he sends me this other Slack message saying, from my experience, it's down all the damn time, just when you need it most. And that's exactly it, right? And that's just a regular, man off the street. What do you think of this application? And it's like, well, yeah, I had to rely on it day to day, and it was unreliable, and that obviously sort of caused him sort of frustration, and kind of blocked his main goal at university, which was getting his coursework in and sort of doing the learning. So really sort of first-hand experience there. And I think then kind of interesting, because at the end of the day, that is what it's all about. Those users using that application and using it productively for their purposes. And I think these sort of set of questions then you raised, which are great ones, which essentially is like, well, does anyone know whether that application is up or down? Our users obviously do, because they're using it, but do we do? We're delivering that application, and do we know the health of that application?
Right, because in our particular case, we have a lot of really good admins, and they don't tolerate downtime. But when they're watching their app, when they start to see something go wrong, they're on the phone, they're talking to other people, they're trying to find out what's going on. And these were the questions that we raised to find out if we could answer those questions more quickly for them, so that when they start to see something going south, they could get answers more quickly. They could say, oh, we know it's at the database layer. We're just going to focus on that and get that resolved quickly. Or, hey, we know it's a networking problem. It's more holistic. It's not necessarily us that's having the problem. It's everyone. But they can get that information, and then they can kind of like just deal with their own problems. They don't have to, kind of poke and hope and just figure out where the problem might be.
And I mean, I think you've made the point a couple of times now. It's not that you weren't doing monitoring at Purdue, and for example, in this application, I think sort of previous to this project, you had those tests running against the availability of the application. But as you say, it's around then pulling that all together, so that you don't just have the pockets of information. You can actually pull that together to then create some actionable steps and sort of take those next steps to resolving it, and sort of putting all that information into the right place at the right time.
And without it all being in one place, it's going to be impossible to actually measure the impact of any given problem.
Correct. And that was where the power of SCOM came in, and then Squared Up as that presentation layer, because we were able to satisfy each of those different views, and then the admin can then click through. And if they wanted to drill into one of the other areas, they could, but we're able to present the data in a nice compact way at each of the different layers quickly, and then there's more information if they want to go digging for it.
Great. So hopefully a very recognizable problem for sort of everyone listening to this webinar. What we want to see is the solution. I guess see Squared Up in action on top of this, and sort of relate what you've done with Squared Up to those challenges that you've outlined. So again, thank you for running a live demo here with us. So Shawn's going to, I think, take the presenter role, fire up Squared Up, and we'll actually see some of those dashboards and perspectives he's put together on top of their monitoring environment in Purdue.
Yeah. Do you see my screen?
Yep, I can see it.
We can. Great. Yep.
Cool. Okay.
Probably, Shawn, a good starting point would just be, before we get stuck into looking at application monitoring with Blackboard, just maybe give us a bit of context around your SCOM environment.
So as you can, this is the starting page in Squared Up. So as you can see, I have a fairly large environment. I think it's like 13 or 14 different servers. We have about 700 Windows servers and 800 Linux servers reporting in. We also have other devices that report in via SNMP, like our EMC Isilon. We have the F5 management pack, so we have the F5 reporting in. We have the Veeam management packs, and they're reporting in for the virtualization layer. And so we're trying to really get a total coverage. We don't have the networking layer in here yet, but I can show you in a little bit. We do have one of the Squared Up tiles that calls the webhooks to pull information from their tools to give a view for the IOC, what we call our IOC, that's the help desk, to give them a view of what's going on in the network layer.
Right, because we talked previously, and you were saying that you've got thousands and thousands of access points across the campus.
Yes, we do. So looking at just the wireless access points, so I think we're in the 30 to 35,000 access points, and then each building, network-wise, the equipment spans many years. So as buildings came online in the old days, they have the switch at the floor level, and then all of the different picks through each of the different rooms, and then the next floor, and the next floor, and then there's a building switch, and then to some central closet back here. So that also numbers in the thousands.
Right. So that's going to crush.
So our networking team, we have our own small city, essentially. And actually, speaking of the city, we branched out into the city. So our networking team actually broadcasts our access point to, we're in West Lafayette. We also broadcast in Lafayette so that the general community at large can use our access points. So they have a really big
neat
infrastructure to support.
And I mean, in terms of those numbers of network devices, again, it's the same thing. They are being monitored. They're not going to be monitored by SCOM anytime soon. It's not designed for that sort of scale of network monitoring, but they are monitored. Great, but actually you need that monitoring information, in the context of your application performance or alongside other data. And we'll hopefully at the end here have a chance to see integration with Squared Up. So it's not being monitored by SCOM. That data is not going into SCOM, but you're pulling that into Squared Up using our web API integration. So hopefully we can finish with a quick demo of that. But should we now sort of take it from the top in terms of the Blackboard application then? Because I think sort of at the top layer you've got your Visio diagram, which is nice to see the use of Visio.
Yep. So when my CIO challenged us to do this, show us end to end, we put together this diagram that just kind of took a couple apps that we would put in front of the IOC and give us the green, yellow, red. Our Blackboard Learn shows red, although it is not red. We have a couple alerts written so that it goes red, so we have something to look at, because otherwise you show up in front of the CIO and show all green. He's like, okay, but show me something broken. And then we can drill into that.
The opposite to what most customers normally have, which is
normally make it green. Thank God, the boss is coming. Make it green.
So we can click into that. So the IOC would just actually have that view, and that's all they would really need. They would just know that it was red and who to call at that point. So getting into the drilling into it, overall health is where you would have your director or your manager. So this is a particular page. Now I helped put it together, but the metrics were created by the Blackboard Learn admin, so I don't understand them specifically, but I do know that they were already collecting things that showed the health of their actual system. So we can look at the different components, our connections to the regional campuses, total and distinct logons for the day. Successful responses is each of the different servers and how they're working, and then error responses and distinct users and authenticated sessions, total sessions. So this particular graph, if you look at this pretty much every day, it looks like this, and this is what we would expect to see. But when there's an outage or we're receiving information from an external entity, I forget who specifically, but we receive external data, I think for transcripts. If they start sending us the data incorrectly, error responses goes up. And in the past, that was an unknown condition. Now the admins can come here and say, oh, it's happening right now. They're all erroring out. Let's go give that vendor a call and get that resolved.
And this is the example of sort of outside in monitoring. So in that stack there, the very top level was outside in. So forget infrastructure monitoring. How are we looking? What's the perspective from our users' point of view?
Right.
Well, actually, for this particular perspective, it's just this is all inside. This is what all of the different servers, that core infrastructure is working at a high level, but from inside. So if we were doing from the customer perspective, we'd go to the next tab. And these are synthetic transactions that actually target different areas of our infrastructure. So the very first one, login time, response time, just hits the web page from a server outside of our internal boundaries. So just hits the internet, hits the home page, just times it. And then on the left-hand side, the second and third ones to the left, grade center instructor. So we have a fake instructor that logs on, goes to the grade center, adds new grades, logs out. And then at the bottom, we have an instructor that logs on, submits a journal entry, and then logs out. And so that stress tests different portions of the infrastructure. And on the right, we have a fake student that logs in, goes to the My Grades, checks the grades, issues comments, and then logs out. Submit assessment, it's the same thing. Logs in, goes to the assessment that the instructor created, inputs information into that assessment, and then logs out. And in that case, it's like the brown fox jumped over the whatever. And then at the bottom is submit assignment, where the student would log in, upload a Word document, and then log out. And then we just repeat those every 2 minutes. And this gives us a good feel for, I know it's a synthetic transaction, but if we had an issue with the boundary of the university, we would see that these things would start to fail, and it's independent of the actual infrastructure. So we can start to see if certain pieces of the infrastructure are failing, if there's something generally in the area. We've had problems with the major ISP in the area where one of the major hubs went down and took the university completely out. We were able to tell that we couldn't get to our services externally, but we could get to our services internally. So this helped us narrow some of that down.
What I love about this is just based on the discussion we've had so far and your introduction to the application. You know, we don't understand this application in any depth, but you've talked us through roughly what it was. We had that example of one of the staff here at Squared Up, sort of experiencing this firsthand. What I love about this page is you can really understand it, right? On that sort of middle right, submit assessment, the student total response time. You can really imagine just those students submitting their assessment, and if that's fading, if that's peaking over sort of 30 seconds or a timeout, then there's a big problem. So I really love the fact you kind of really relate this to the customer's perspective, the user's experience, and sort of gives you some confidence that the application is working as expected.
Absolutely. Yep. And so again, going back to that diagram, each of the different tabs at the top for the Squared Up perspective is in line with that original diagram. So overall health, customer perspective, and then as the transaction occurs, they hit our F5 layer. And
I think it's probably worth pointing out, Shawn, the diagram where we showed the stack there was written before the solution. So it's not like you created the solution and Squared Up and said, okay, now let's map this onto a nice slide that tells our RCO what the problem was. That slide was written first. That was a challenge that outlined the problem. And what is fantastic to see is that has mapped onto a solution in Squared Up here.
Yes. Well, and if we look at timeline, that happened in October of 2016. And then he challenged us to have everything together by December of 2016. And you guys had just released it, and it really dovetailed nicely with what we wanted to do. Perfect. So coming in, we raise up the F5 so we can see device total bits in and out. We can look at the local traffic pools. Now, this information is specific to the Blackboard Learn app. There's a whole lot of other information in the F5, but we're just filtering out all the other noise and only raising those things that are important to the Blackboard Learn app. And so I know we talked about the F5 dashboards, which we can show in a bit, but this is just specific. And then
again, enough information for the application engineer who is looking at the overall health, maybe the customer perspective, can now switch to the F5s, get a sense of whether there looks like there's a problem there from that dashboard. Without understanding any sort of F5 in depth. And of course, the F5 administrator can then drill down and do sort of further analysis there, but that's enough to surface at the application level.
Right. And then as we walk across, we can go to the server level. This is just all the different servers as they wanted to drill down. But then we also have a front-end health. So we break up the front-end servers versus the content servers. Some just basic metrics. So the Blackboard Learn admins have, at a glance, what's going on with their servers at the operating system layer real quick. And then we can go to the database layer. And again, we don't have any database management packs yet. So the metrics that we collect here was from the operating system or things that the Blackboard Learn's admins could pull out and then look at. So we have some database monitors where they actually look at the active MQ or any of the other pieces.
I think a key point there, Shawn, is that you worked with them to actually pull out the metrics they wanted. You didn't just look at it and say, well, this is what we have in SCOM, let's throw those on a dashboard, or these.
Correct.
Right. You said to them, what do you need to see? They said, this is the important stuff, and you stopped there.
And actually, even at that point, so if you really think about the stack into the different silos, yes, we worked with the learn admins to find out what they wanted to see, but at the virtualization layer, I went to the virtualization admins and said, what information is key to you to troubleshoot that you would want to give the Blackboard learn admins? And so looking at the virtualization view, they would have them look at the latency. So this is the Blackboard learn servers at the virtualization layer and how they're behaving on, in this particular case, is VMware. So they can look at latency, CPU ready time, and ballooning. Those are the big three that the virtualization admins would look at to find out if those machines are misbehaving. So now the Blackboard learn admins have the ability to go look at their own metrics at the virtualization layer, see if their own services are doing any of those bad things, and then they can take corrective actions without even calling the virtualization admins. Or the virtualization admins can come in here and check real quick, oh, these servers particularly are not having a problem, we're good. We can keep going down to the topology layer. So in this particular case, we used VADA, built the DA. That's actually where we started a lot of this, and all of those different servers come in.
And these are all Linux servers as well, aren't they?
Well, I was going to say, as a reminder, you can almost forget, just looking at this, that actually this application is entirely on a non-Microsoft stack. So this is a great example of cross-platform monitoring with SCOM.
Well, and that was part of the challenge from the CIO, because historically, a solution would be very siloed. Again, you would have a SQL Server monitoring solution, then you have your Oracle Grid, then you would have your MySQL whatever. Well, in this particular case, they wanted to pick something that was key to the university, that was completely Linux-based. So they wanted to target all of those pieces of the infrastructure that traditionally we didn't have holistic monitoring on. Now, we had some monitoring with Xymon, and so that was where the operating system metrics came from, but we didn't have anything that went end-to-end on this at all. And then we can check out alerts where we have some F5 tests that are failing.
And that sort of covers the perspectives on the application, just with the sort of the short sort of time remaining. Can we take a look at sort of other than aspects of the SCOM, the Squared Up environment you have? So we've talked about the F5s briefly, but also I think something we'd love to see is the OMS integration and use of the web API tile. So all topics we've covered off in the last few coffee breaks. Yep. So it'd be good to see those in action.
So the F5 packs is a new addition, and we have a fairly large F5 implementation, and it just keeps on going. It's a bit bigger
than we showed last week, isn't it?
Yes. It has a lot of data. Let me reload that there. And then we can go to the infrastructure view for the F5, which is kind of cool. And then we have the pool members. So again, lots of data. We talked about the OMS plugin, and pick a server here. So this particular perspective passes in the server name, goes out and checks OMS for patches that need to be applied, recent software changes, and recent configuration changes. And so we have that for a large portion of our landscape now. And then as I'm starting to use OMS, I'm raising that information through Squared Up out to the users, because I don't actually let my users in OMS right now, because I use Squared Up as a single point of entry for our infrastructure. I don't want to deal with the training for other tools. I just want everything to be in one consistent user interface. And so that's where we're leveraging Squared Up for this. So the OMS tile for us is perfect.
And that sort of fits in perfectly, both sort of naturally in terms of looking at a particular server or an application or a group. You just have a tab there that has the information you need. So there's no context switch or even real you don't need appreciation that is a separate platform there collecting that data, right? It's just the data you need, when you need it. And also I think something else to sort of pick up is the speed of this environment, so you drill down into the server there and switched over to that OMS tab, and it appeared pretty much instantly, and bang, there it was sort of coming down from OMS. And again, from a user experience point of view, it sort of, it focuses on just getting the job done, right? And getting the data you need, rather than having to think about what application you're about to fire up, where to navigate to, logging on, tapping your fingers, and then getting to the data you ultimately need. It's all there on demand. Yeah,
and I think you mentioned Sean, previously your IOCs has quite a high turnover rate, doesn't it? Because are they student volunteers?
Yes. It's managed by students, so we try to hire students to do a lot of our work. So even the networking team, they hire teams of students to go wire buildings, rewire buildings, work in the data centers. We hire students at the IOC. They handle customer calls, and so each semester there's huge turnover because the students are coming and going if they like the job, not like the job, or whatever. So training is a huge issue. So consistency from semester to semester is very key for our infrastructure. And actually, that's a good lead-in, because if we go at the top, we have network device statuses. This actually feeds data from Cisco Prime and from our LibreNMS. Cisco Prime actually monitors the the access points for wireless, and Libre manages the physical infrastructure. So we pull in data from that, and only things that are down that we want the IOC to look at. At the bottom, we have Xymon that is still in use, because again, I didn't take away the other monitoring tools. They're still using them at those different team levels. But in this particular case, we wanted to still raise some of those Xymon alerts for the IOC where we haven't duplicated in Operations Manager yet. So here, it actually, the top one uses the Web API tile, the bottom one uses the SQL database tile. And so Xymon writes data to a database, we pull the data from there and show those records.
Yeah, and I mean, Xymon
so,
is a tool from the 80s as well, isn't it? Like, that's not an interface you'd want to give to people.
Yes. Yeah, so we can actually just put this in front of the IOC. This is what they see when something pops up on this list. They then can either drill into the other tools if they've received training on it, or just go to their list on who to call. And there it is. And if we can pass comments through, we pass comments through so that they know whether to call or not call.
And again, I love this sort of going back to that very opening slide about looking at monitoring and saying, well, this is just not working for us. How can we really make this effective? The answer wasn't, let's just throw this all out. Buy in another new wonderful platform that we've invested a lot of money in and deploy out that, and fingers crossed, hopefully this time round it will work. What you've actually done is just be much more sort of pragmatic. Said, well, we do have the data collection, we do have all the monitoring in place. The reason it's not working for us is because we don't have sort of the data in front of the right people at the right time, and sort of kind of recognizing that, and actually then now sort of building a solution really primarily on top of systems and data you already had. And I think going back to the application monitoring, you'd said that team had already built those those tests. They already knew what they wanted to monitor. It's sort of surfacing it in the right way.
Right. And what is not shown really at the top, if you even look at our different menus, we're using Squared Up with the role-based access control. So while I see all of these, the IOC just sees the Everyone tab. The student team has their drop-down. The Windows team can see theirs. Virtualization team, as you can see, makes great use of it. The DBA team is really starting to buy into this, and actually they're going to get rid of one of their tools soon.
That's definitely a win there.
And then we have the admin view, and that's pretty much it. We're starting to do Exchange, but each team gets their own particular view. So it's really a nice win for us.
It's great to see all this sort of stuff we've been talking about the past few weeks really coming to life actually in a real production environment, rather than our lab.
Yeah. So Shawn, I think you've probably got loads more that you'd love to show us, and we'd love to show our audience. I think we're sort of running out of time, so we'll wrap there. But it's just fantastic as always to see this all in action. Hopefully we'll revisit this at some other time and sort of kind of see more of your development in Purdue and see more of the results.
Sure, anytime.